He lay frozen inside the thin shell of his sleeping bag, eyes fixed on the narrow peak of the tent where cold moisture gathered like a second sky. A bead of water loosened and slid down the fabric. He didn't blink. This wasn't wildlife. Years outdoors had taught him the language of the forest. Hooves hesitated and doubled back. Heavy animals dragged their weight with careless honesty. What moved beyond the trees now was different, steady, intentional, upright. Each step placed with thought. Whoever it was didn't rush. They didn't approach. They traced the campsite in a wide, unbroken loop, never crossing the invisible line that marked the edge of the clearing, just close enough to be heard, just far enough to stay unseen. Again and again, his fingers closed around the flashlight beside him. He didn't turn it on. The rules came back to him with cruel clarity. No artificial light after dark. If something moves outside your shelter, do not react. Stillness is safety. Stillness ends the visit. Except this visit wasn't ending. His breathing thinned, careful not to betray him. The steps slowed, stopped. A shadow pressed close to the fabric of his tent, and with it came sound, not footsteps now, but breath. Slow, disciplined. The breathing of someone practiced at being quiet. Then the presence drifted away. The circle resumed. He had been told this might happen, that the first night tested everyone. That fear was a threshold, not a warning. The woman who'd briefed them spoke with calm certainty, the kind that didn't invite questions. Trust the process, she'd said. Sounds only have power if you give it to them. Lying there now, he wondered how sorrow had carried him this far from sense. 3 nights, no speech, no devices, no contact with the outside world. 3 nights in the Talatna range with 4 people who barely looked alive when they stood in daylight. People who moved as if parts of them were already elsewhere. The invitation had arrived less than a month after the burial. Thick paper, hand-delivered, no sender, just a set of coordinates, a date, and one unsettling instruction. Bring nothing that rattles. He should have thrown it away, should have felt the unease buried in that sentence. But the apartment still held her ghost. The scent of her lotion clung to the bathroom. Her favorite mug waited in the rack. A dark ring dried at the bottom like a bruise. Some mornings he woke certain she was behind the shower curtain, that the sirens and machines and final silence had all been a mistake. The card promised quiet, and quiet felt like relief. Everyone around him had filled the days with sound, sympathy wrapped in advice, voices urging him to start over, to move on, to return home. Even the neighbors below seemed louder now, their laughter rising through the floor like an accusation. Silence wasn't emptiness, it was refuge. So he followed the coordinates. 2 hours north of the city, where the road thinned and the trees closed ranks. Autumn had already stripped the aspens bare, their branches rattling faintly in the wind. When he reached the trailhead at dawn, 4 figures were already there. They didn't greet him. They stood apart, evenly spaced, eyes lowered. A woman with iron-gray hair and a posture too rigid for comfort. A thin young man whose hands never quite settled. An older figure built solid and immovable, like he'd learned long ago how to endure without complaint. No one smiled. And as he took his place among them, the forest seemed to lean in, listening, waiting for the rules to begin. A broad man stood off to one side, shoulders slumped in a way that spoke of past strength worn down by years of restraint. A fighter who no longer fought. Near him was a woman about Gideon's age, her face carefully neutral, the expression of someone who had learned survival through emotional distance. No one exchanged names. No one even nodded. The woman with the silver-streaked hair lifted a single finger to her lips. The motion was soft, almost kind, yet it tightened something low in Gideon's gut, a warning wrapped in gentleness. She turned and gestured down the narrow trail, and they followed without a word. For the first hour, the quiet felt ordinary. Boots pressed into soil. Wind slid through leafless branches. But Gideon became painfully aware of every sound he made, the scuff of fabric, the faint click of breath in his throat. The others moved with discipline, steps placed carefully, bodies trained to erase themselves. The clearing appeared suddenly, ringed by spruce so thick the forest beyond looked swallowed by shadow. 4 tents were already standing, positioned with exact symmetry, close enough to hear movement, far enough to deny comfort. At the center sat a circle of stones forming a fire pit, pristine and unused. No ash, no burn marks, not abandoned, reserved. The silver-haired woman pointed to the open space at the northeast corner. That was his. Once the tents were secured, she gathered them with a quiet sweep of her hand and reached into her jacket. She removed a stiff, laminated card and held it out where they could all see. This is the silence protocol. Her voice was low, steady, practiced. You are selected because you are seeking relief. We provide it freely, provided you observe 3 conditions. Her eyes moved slowly across them as she spoke. After sunset, there will be no sound, no speaking, no fire, no light, no movement without necessity. If you hear something outside your shelter, do not respond. Do not investigate. Remain still. It will move on. Do not leave the camp after dark. She paused, letting the words settle. These rules are not punishments. They exist for your recovery and your protection. Trust the quiet. It understands you better than you think. At the bottom of the card were 4 signatures, all but one space filled. She extended a pen toward Gideon. His fingers hovered. Trust the quiet, as though it were alive, as though it listened. And that second rule, if you hear something, not an animal, not the wind, just something. He thought of the drive back, of the apartment waiting unchanged, of memories that spoke whether he wanted them to or not. He signed. The ink looked thin and uncertain beside the others, his name looping awkwardly, as if written by someone younger, less sure. The afternoon dissolved into separate silences. Gideon watched the others with the intensity of someone studying an unfamiliar culture. The broad man, he later learned his name was Rooter, sat near the edge of the clearing with fishing gear spread neatly at his feet. His hands were thick, scarred, yet astonishingly careful as he threaded line through hooks and guides. He tested the tension, then dismantled it all and began again. He never once approached the creek. It wasn't about catching anything. It was about repetition, about giving restless hands a task when the mouth was forbidden. The youngest of them, Cole, sat cross-legged near his tent, spine straight. Eyes half-lidded, he barely moved as if practicing disappearance. Gideon wondered how long he'd been training himself not to be noticed, and what had taught him that skill. As the light faded and shadows stretched inward, the clearing seemed to shrink. And for the first time, Gideon understood that silence here wasn't absence. It was presence. He sat upright, spine rigid, palms resting flat against his knees. His mouth moved faintly. At first, Gideon assumed it was prayer, but the pattern was too precise, too steady. Numbers, he realized. A slow count up to 10, then back to the beginning, over and over. A way to keep the mind occupied before it wandered somewhere it couldn't survive. Petra circled the edge of the clearing with careful intention. Her fingertips brushed the bark of every tree she passed. Every few steps she stopped, pressed her hand fully against the trunk and closed her eyes. She wasn't measuring distance. She was memorizing it, learning where safety ended and something older began, mapping the invisible border between their fragile order and the forest that waited beyond it. Gideon tried to distract himself with a book. The paperback felt familiar, comforting, but the lines refused to settle into meaning. He kept looking up, at the others, at Ingrid. She sat beside the untouched fire pit, hands folded neatly in her lap, unmoving, not relaxed, fixed, like a monument placed there long before they arrived, like something meant to be observed, not approached. The quiet thickened. The sun was still above the treetops, yet the silence already pressed in, heavy and intimate. Gideon became acutely aware of every small noise he produced, the soft groan of his chair, the faint rasp of paper, the sound of his own breath, which now seemed embarrassingly loud. He tried to soften it, shallower breaths, slower movement. That's when he noticed the others were doing the same. They moved through the last light of day, as if rehearsing for something unforgiving, training themselves to exist with as little disturbance as possible, as though sound itself were a liability. At dusk, Ingrid rose. She held a small brass bell in her hand. The group responded immediately, standing without instruction, drawn toward the center of the clearing by something older than habit. They formed a loose arc around her. Gideon stepped into place without thinking, his body recognizing the gravity of the moment. This wasn't a meeting, it was a threshold. Ingrid lifted the bell slowly, allowing the pause to stretch. Then she rang it once. The sound cut through the forest like a blade, too clean, too loud. It echoed against the trees and returned altered, twisted, as if the woods rejected it. Gideon felt a jolt of discomfort, a sense that something private had been violated. Ingrid pointed toward the horizon, where the sun kissed the mountain line, spilling red and violet across the sky. Then she drew her finger across her lips, not a gentle hush, but a deliberate sealing motion, as though closing a lock. The others acknowledged the gesture with small nods. Gideon followed, though his pulse had begun to race. The light slipped away. No one spoke. No one lingered. Without a glance exchanged, they turned and walked to their tents with the solemn resolve of people stepping into a place governed by absolute rules, where intention didn't matter, only obedience. And the silence took hold. Breaking them carried weight. You could feel it in the air. Gideon watched Petra hesitate at her tent, fingers curled around the zipper pull. She stood there longer than necessary, shoulders tight, as if gathering courage, not for the dark outside, but for the confined space she was about to enter. When she finally slipped inside, it felt less like retreat and more like surrender. He mirrored her without realizing it. Inside his own tent, he lay flat in his sleeping bag, boots still on, jacket zipped. The fabric smelled sharp and artificial, plastic, chemicals, a sterile newness that made his chest ache. It wasn't like his old gear. That one had smelled of smoke and rain and use, of shared mornings and inside jokes and the quiet comfort of familiarity. Miriam had insisted they give it all away after their last trip. "We'll buy better stuff next time," she'd said, smiling. There was no next time. He stared at the narrow peak of the tent ceiling as moisture began to gather, each droplet catching the final traces of daylight like tiny suspended stars. His watch glowed faintly. 6:47 p.m. 14 hours until morning. 14 hours of silence inside a forest that felt wrong in a way he couldn't put into words. Nothing specific stood out. Not the trees, not the air, not the chill creeping into his bones. It was how everything pressed together, how the place seemed to lean inward, compressing his thoughts until they pulsed behind his eyes. He tried to reason with himself. This was normal. This was nightfall. He had slept outdoors countless times before. But it had never felt like this. The darkness didn't feel empty. It felt occupied. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It felt restrained, as though something enormous was holding its breath. When he checked his watch again, it was 9:23 p.m. That was when the movement began. Slow steps traced the perimeter of the clearing. Not careless, not searching, controlled, deliberate, and suddenly everything clicked with terrifying clarity. The rules weren't symbolic. They weren't about mindfulness or grief or respect for the wilderness. They were instructions for staying alive. The footsteps stopped outside his tent, closer than before. He heard breathing, ragged and damp like lungs dragged to exhaustion, as if whatever stood there had traveled a long distance to arrive. The tent wall bowed inward, a distinct pressure shaped like a hand. Then another. Then something pressed closer, broader, heavier. The fabric stretched around contours that might have been a face, features hinted at but never fully revealed in the dark. Gideon froze. His heart slammed so violently, he was sure it counted as noise, that fear itself was a violation. He held his breath until his chest burned, convinced that simply existing too loudly would invite consequence. The pressure eased. The shape withdrew. Footsteps resumed their path. He remained rigid for hours, tracking the sound as it circled again and again. He counted without moving, marking each pass. 12, 13, 14. He searched for meaning in it. Did it slow near certain tents? Did it linger longer somewhere else? Was there a pattern that explained who would be chosen first? There was nothing. Just flawless repetition, perfect restraint, endless patience. This wasn't pursuit. It was expectation. Whatever walked those circles wasn't trying to scare them. It was waiting, because it knew the truth Gideon was only beginning to understand. No one could stay silent forever. Sometime after midnight, his body turned against him. Minor irritations swelled into crises. A knot tightened in his calf, sharp and unrelenting. An itch bloomed between his shoulder blades, unreachable, maddening. His bladder began to fill, slowly at first, then with undeniable insistence. He knew what that meant. Sooner or later, he would have to open the tent. He would have to step into the dark that never stopped moving. The thought locked his throat. He tried to escape into memories of Miriam, but that only deepened the pain. Grief was louder than fear. Better to cling to the terror outside than to face the silence she had left behind. At least fear still responded to him. When he checked his watch again, the dim numbers read 2:17 a.m. By then, he had stopped wondering what walked the perimeter. Acceptance settled in, heavy and cold. Like a bad dream you no longer try to explain. You don't ask why the walls bend or the floor disappears. You just wait for it to end. His thoughts shifted without permission, sliding from what is it to how do I last until morning. That shift mattered. Something inside him gave way, yielding to a reality where the impossible no longer needed justification. It simply existed. Near 3 o'clock, exhaustion finally outpaced fear. His eyes burned, then blurred. Even the breathing outside the tent faded into background noise as his body made a brutal calculation. Sleep was now survival. Vigilance could no longer compete. He drifted into a shallow, broken sleep. In it, Miriam paced the bedroom in slow circles. Her feet made no sound against the floor. He tried to call her name to ask why she wouldn't stop moving, but his voice had vanished. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Morning arrived without ceremony. Cold, colorless. Gideon unzipped the tent and blinked at the clearing, stunned to find the others already awake. Stoves hissed softly as oatmeal cooked. Packs were being organized. Faces were calm, rested, as if the night had been empty. Ingrid noticed him and offered a small smile. She tapped her ear, then lifted her shoulders in an easy shrug. "Did you hear anything?" The words landed like an insult. "Just animals," someone murmured. Cole crouched beside him as the rest of the group dismantled camp with unsettling speed. He met Gideon's hollow stare and gave a single nod, a look that carried reassurance without comfort. "First night. It eases. You learn. No words required." His finger rose to his lips, a gentle reminder. He gestured toward Ingrid, who was checking her watch. "Not yet," the motion said. "Nearly an hour until full daylight. Nearly an hour until speech returned." They set out soon after, following Ingrid deeper into the woods. The path thinned until it was barely distinguishable, more a suggestion than a trail. Gideon tried to memorize turns, landmarks, anything, but the forest refused to cooperate. Every tree looked the same. The sky hung low and gray, offering no sense of direction. By midday, they reached a ridge. Below them stretched a vast basin filled with dead spruce, trunks bleached and lifeless. Thousands of them stood shoulder to shoulder, gray and brittle, a forest killed from the inside. It spread outward until it met the horizon, a massive, silent grave. Ingrid stopped at the edge and looked out over it. And for the first time since arriving, Gideon felt certain they had not come here by accident. By daylight, speech was permitted, but words felt unnecessary, almost intrusive. No one rushed to fill the air. Gideon stood at the edge of the overlook, staring down into the valley, and a realization settled over him with quiet certainty. They hadn't stopped here by chance. This place carried a weight, the kind you don't see at first but feel in your bones. Ingrid hadn't guided them to neutral ground. Every stop so far had shared the same unease, spaces where the world felt thin, where the line between what made sense and what didn't had been worn smooth by time and repetition. Below them stretched a forest that had lost the will to survive. The trees stood lifeless and pale, thousands of them locked in permanent surrender, not fallen, abandoned from the inside out. A landscape that hadn't been destroyed in violence, but hollowed by something patient. Someone sat beside him. The older woman, Donna, offered him a handful of trail mix without a word. Her eyes were gentle but heavy, the eyes of someone who had watched something precious fracture and never truly return. When she spoke, she kept her gaze fixed on the valley. "They came to me after my daughter died." Her voice barely carried. An invitation showed up, same as yours. Gideon turned toward her, but she didn't look back. "This is my fourth time." The words landed harder than he expected. He wanted to ask the obvious questions. Did it help? Did the silence soften the pain? Did coming back mean it worked, or that it did? Her expression answered him before he spoke. She smiled faintly, not kindly, not bitterly, just honest. She reached into her jacket and produced a small notebook. He hadn't noticed it before. Inside were pages filled with careful marks, tallies arranged in neat groups, dates written at the top and bottom. Days. I stopped calling her phone, she whispered. Stopped listening to her voice just to feel close to something that was already gone. She closed the book. I needed to count something. Needed proof time was moving. A pause. But time doesn't heal. It just teaches you how to carry the space. Before Gideon could find words that wouldn't insult her truth, Ingrid stood. A simple gesture, time to go. They descended into the valley. The light changed as they moved lower, shifting into a dull, unhealthy shade, greenish, sick, wrong. The dead trees creaked softly, swaying in a wind Gideon couldn't feel on his skin. That sound followed them, constant and hollow. The new camp felt exposed. No dense ring of living forest this time, just skeletal trunks standing like watchers. The clearing offered no comfort, no illusion of shelter. Night came quickly, earlier than before. At 8:50, while color still lingered in the sky, the footsteps returned. Not one pattern, several, 2, maybe 3 distinct rhythms circling the camp. They moved with the same discipline, but there was more energy now, more urgency. The steps paused outside each tent, one after another. Breathing followed, wet, ragged, desperate. The sound of lungs that had traveled far to arrive. At 10:47, the silence shattered. A zipper screamed open. Cole's tent. Footsteps pounded across the ground. A beam of light tore through the trees, wild and shaking. No, I can't, I'm done. The words didn't fade. They stopped. Instantly. As if reality itself had been switched off. The flashlight hit the ground, still glowing, illuminating dead needles and pale stones. Every sound outside the camp vanished. No footsteps. No breathing. Nothing. Then slowly, the movement resumed. But now there were 4. One pattern was wrong. Too fast, too uneven, running. Stumbling, circling the camp in panic. The sound of someone trapped in a loop they couldn't escape. Gideon pressed his fist against his mouth to keep from making a sound. And in that moment, he understood the final truth of the silence. This place didn't take people. It taught them how to stay. Until they couldn't anymore. He crushed his fist against his lips to keep the sound inside. He stayed that way until the sky lightened, listening to Cole run. Not flee, not search. Run. Circles carved into the forest, over and over, his feet never slowing, never stopping. No cries, no words, just motion. Hour after hour, the rhythm smoothed out, sinking gradually with the others until it became indistinguishable. By morning, Cole's tent was empty. The sleeping bag lay open, cooling, as if he'd only stepped away for a moment. No one acknowledged it. No glances. No pauses. Ingrid cooked oatmeal for 4, not 5. The remaining group moved with flawless efficiency, as though the night had passed without incident, as though a person had not been erased. Gideon couldn't speak, but the question burned through him. When they began breaking camp, he stepped toward Ingrid. He didn't need words. His face carried them all. Where is he? She met his eyes, and something like sorrow crossed her features. He broke protocol. The weight of those 3 words hit him harder than any explanation could have. Final. Closed. Gideon gestured wildly toward the trees. He's still out there. We can't just leave him. Her hand settled on his shoulder, gentle, firm, impossible to push away. The rules keep us safe. Safe from what? She touched his cheek, the way a parent might soothe a child who had just learned a truth that couldn't be unlearned. They left the dead valley by a different path. Gideon tried to remember the way twisted roots, split trunks, bends in the ground, but the forest refused to stay fixed. Trails faded behind them. New ones appeared ahead. Direction dissolved. By the time the sun reached its peak, he had no idea where they were. The next camp sat beside a lake so still it looked solid, like polished stone. No wind disturbed it. No insects touched its surface. It reflected nothing. As they worked, the older man, Reuter, settled beside Gideon. His movements were slow, deliberate, shaped by years of pain and careful management. He hammered a tense stake into the soil with quiet focus. "You're wondering why we keep coming back," he said, eyes still on his hands. It wasn't a question. Gideon nodded. Reuter drove the stake down with 3 controlled strikes. "Because going back out there doesn't make it better," he said. "Grief doesn't leave. It just changes how it hurts." He gestured toward the silent tree line. "Here at least the rules don't change. You follow them, you're safe." "And if you do," Gideon whispered. Reuter didn't answer. He didn't need to. "That's insane," Gideon said. Reuter smiled, and it was the saddest expression Gideon had ever seen. "You heard Cole last night," he said. "Did he sound like he was suffering?" Gideon thought of the footsteps, the frantic running that slowly evened out into something steady, purposeful. "No," he admitted, "just moving." Reuter rose, joints cracking softly. "Some people call that peace." That night, 5 patterns moved around the camp. Gideon counted them, separating each rhythm in his mind. 4 were familiar, precise, disciplined. The 5th lagged, stumbled now and then, still learning the cadence. At 11:34 p.m., something brushed the side of Gideon's tent. Not pressed, not tested, just a gentle touch, like reassurance. And for the first time since arriving, Gideon wondered, not with fear but with quiet horror, how long it would take before that 5th rhythm felt normal. And how many nights before he stopped hopping, it wouldn't be his turn. Something touched Gideon's tent. Not forceful, not threatening, almost inquisitive. The fabric bowed inward, forming the clear outline of a hand. Then another, slow, careful. After that, something broader pressed close, perhaps a face. The nylon stretched and shaped itself around contours he couldn't fully see, features hinted at but never revealed by the darkness. Gideon froze. He stopped breathing altogether. His heart thundered so violently he was convinced it counted as sound, that fear itself might be loud enough to condemn him. He was certain the thing outside could hear the panic vibrating through his chest, that simply being afraid marked him as different. Then the pressure lifted. The shape withdrew. The footsteps resumed their steady rotation, as patient and precise as ever. Morning came without mercy. Ingrid gathered them at the edge of the lake, where the water lay motionless, black and depthless. She held out the familiar laminated card, but this time Gideon noticed writing on the back. He read it once, then again. You came seeking quiet. You discovered what noise costs. Sound draws attention. It separates you. It announces your solitude to things that feed on it. Silence is not punishment. It is concealment. We are not built to stand alone. We are not brave enough to cry into the dark, and survive what answers. Stay quiet. Stay protected. Stay together. Or join those who walk. His fingers trembled as he lowered the car. Donna stood beside him, her face empty now, hollowed clean. Ingrid raised her hand, spreading all 5 fingers. She did it again, and again. Then she gestured toward the forest, opening her arms wide, far wider than any number she could show. More than us. More than 5. Donna leaned closer, her whisper thin and breaking. We were all chosen, she said. The widowed, the parents who bury children, the ones who wake up alone and remember. Her voice faltered. We're easy to find. We've been calling into the dark for years. She swallowed. We just didn't know something was listening. Gideon's voice rose before he could stop it. This is insane. We have to leave now. Ingrid's hand closed gently around his arm. She shook her head and pointed toward the sun, already sinking toward the mountains. 3 hours. Then she mimed walking, then crossed her arms sharply. The message was unmistakable. There wasn't enough daylight to reach safety. One more night. Gideon spent the afternoon at the lake's edge, staring into the impossible stillness. The surface never moved, never rippled, no matter how long he watched. He leaned closer, searching for his reflection. There was none. Only darkness, only depth. He picked up a stone and dropped it. It vanished without sound. No splash, no ripple, no proof it had ever touched the water. He dropped another. And another. Each one disappeared, as if the lake refused to acknowledge intrusion. After the 5th stone, he stopped. The lake wasn't broken. It was deliberate, just like everything else here. As dusk crept closer, Gideon's thoughts drifted back to the apartment waiting for him. Miriam's clothes still hanging untouched, her toothbrush standing where she'd left it, the crossword she never finished folded beside the couch. All the small, quiet things that made noise only when you lost them. And for the first time since arriving, Gideon understood the real temptation of this place. Not safety, not peace, escape. Because here, in the silence, he didn't have to face the life that kept calling his name. The unfinished puzzle still waited on the coffee table. Blue ink filled the corners of the grid. Her pen lay across the page, perfectly placed, like she'd only stepped into the other room. Gideon had turned their apartment into a shrine, every object frozen in time, every trace preserved with reverence. He told himself it was love. Sitting beside that unnatural lake, he finally understood the truth. He hadn't been honoring her. He had been guarding his guilt. Every untouched item was a confession, proof of what he hadn't said, proof of the apology he delayed, proof of the morning they wasted on anger instead of laughter, proof that his final words to her had been sharp, dismissive, small. The thought hit him so hard he had to stand, had to move, had to escape his own chest before it crushed him. Later, Reuter joined him by the water. He followed Gideon's stare into the black surface, then picked up a stone, rolling it slowly between his thick fingers. My wife didn't die suddenly, he said at last. Cancer, 18 months. He spoke like someone reciting weather data, no emotion left to spend. Near the end, I caught myself hoping it would just be over. A pause. Not because I didn't love her. The waiting was worse than the loss. He dropped the stone. It vanished into the lake without sound. That's the thought I can't outrun, he said quietly. That I wished for the end, and then it came. Gideon's throat closed, because he understood. They had argued that morning over nothing. Garbage, tone, pride. He'd called Miriam unreasonable. She walked out without looking back. No kiss, no softness. His last gift to her had been criticism. Reuter rose slowly, joints popping. We're all guilty of something, he said. That's why we're here, not because we're victims, because we're haunted. The sun sank in a blaze of purple and gold, breathtaking and uncaring. Ingrid rang the bell. Gideon returned to his tent, but this time he didn't lie down. He sat upright, legs crossed, flashlight resting in his palm, a folded knife tucked where he could reach it. If something came for him tonight, it wouldn't be easy. The footsteps began at 8:03. 5 patterns. Steady, patient. At 9:50, a zipper whispered open. Dana's tent. Every muscle in Gideon's body locked. He heard her steps, unhurried, almost peaceful, moving across the clearing toward the lake. He should have stayed silent. He should have remembered the rules. But something inside him shattered. Dana, he breathed. No. The word barely existed, but in that suffocating quiet, it rang like an alarm. The footsteps stopped. All of them. Dana stopped too. Then she spoke, her voice distant, unfocused, filled with wonder. I can hear her, she said softly. My daughter. A pause. A wet rattling in hair. She's been alone for so long. Dana laughed. The sound was wrong, not hysterical, not broken, relieved, recognizing joy stripped of sanity. It was worse than screaming. Then she ran. Toward the lake. A small splash. Final. Silence returned. But when the footsteps began again, there were 6. And one of them was too light. Too eager. Still learning how to circle. They were closer now, not lurking at the tree line, but pressing right up to the edge of camp. 6 distinct patterns marked the ground. The newest movements were wrong, uneven, dragging, as if the bodies making them were wadding through something thick and unseen. Gideon clamped both hands over his mouth. He had spoken. He had made sound. The rules were clear. Noise marked you. Noise separated you. They were here for him. The footsteps stopped. All 6 of them. They formed a loose arc around his tent, close enough that he could hear breath, wet, strained, hungry. And beneath it all, softer but unmistakable, came Dana's voice, repeating his name again and again. Not angry, not desperate, reverent, like a chant. The zipper began to move. From the outside, Gideon's hand snapped to the knife. His other closed around the flashlight. His pulse roared in his ears. He wouldn't go quietly. He wouldn't run into the dark like Dana. If this was the end, he would meet it standing. Don't. Ingrid's voice slipped through the opening, barely more than air. Her hand appeared, palm raised in a calm, steady warning. They're testing you. His grip trembled. What are they? He whispered. And why us? Her pause was heavy. We made them, she said at last. Grief with nowhere to land. Loneliness that outlived its owner. Guilt that never found forgiveness. She leaned closer. The rules don't protect us from them. They protect them from us, from becoming more. His breath hitched. Then why invite me? Ingrid's face emerged from the darkness, unreadable in the low light. Because you already know how to be quiet, she said gently. You've been practicing for months, alone in that apartment, surrounded by her life, never screaming, never breaking, just enduring. She held out her hand. 6 more hours, she said. Until morning, you can do that. The footsteps started again, wider now, drifting back toward the trees. All except one. Dana's uneven drag remained just beyond the fabric of his tent, waiting. Gideon made his choice. He placed the knife on the ground. He kept the flashlight but left it dark. He took Ingrid's hand. She led him into the center of the clearing, where Rooter and Petra sat back to back, legs crossed, eyes closed. Ingrid guided Gideon into place, completing the shape. 4 people, spines touching, facing outward, holding the dark at bay not with strength, but with restraint. Ingrid leaned close, her breath warm against his ear. If you see movement, don't respond. If you hear your name, don't answer. If someone you loved appears, don't acknowledge them. A pause. They aren't real, they're echoes, what the lonely remember. How long, he whispered. Until sunrise. She hesitated. And when the grief grows loud again, we'll send another invitation. Because this is the only place where silence isn't empty. Her voice softened. It's full. The hours stretched thin. Gideon watched the darkness and felt it watch back. Shapes drifted between the trees, tall figures that bent in ways human bodies shouldn't, limbs too long, joints turning at impossible angles. They circled endlessly, patiently. And sometimes, only sometimes, he was certain he saw Cole among them, still running, still moving, his face blank of pain, blank of memory. Just motion, just quiet, just belonging. Gideon kept his eyes open. He kept his mouth closed. And when the first pale hint of morning finally touched the sky, the footsteps faded, one by one, until only the forest remained. Silent, waiting for the next invitation, blank with relief. But Gideon wasn't watching the figures anymore, not really. He watched the spaces between them, the gaps where nothing stood. That was where the fear lived, not in what almost showed itself, but in what refused to. In the pauses between footsteps, in the moments when the forest seemed to inhale and forget to exhale, in the waiting. At 2:33 a.m., one of the shapes stopped. Not at the tree line. Closer. Right at the invisible boundary where firelight would have reached if fire had been allowed. It stood there, perfectly still. Gideon couldn't tell if it was facing him, peering into him, or simply occupying the same direction of space. He wasn't even sure looking applied to something like this. Time stretched. 5 minutes. 10. The figure didn't shift, didn't breathe, didn't sway. It felt deliberate, like examination, like memorization, as if it were learning the exact outline of him to use later. Then slowly, it raised one hand. Not in threat, not in invitation, just lifted it. A wave, a greeting. I see you. Gideon's throat tightened until it burned. Every human instinct screamed at him to respond, to acknowledge, to prove he was still a person, still polite, still alive enough to wave back. Ingrid's spine pressed firmly against his. Her breathing remained steady, controlled. She knew. She had seen this before. And Gideon understood then this was the trap, not terror, not violence, courtesy, the oldest reflex of all, the need to be recognized. He stayed still, pretended his body was stone, pretended his eyes were empty, pretended he didn't understand that the thing was trying to make him human again. After what felt like an hour, but was probably only minutes, the hand lowered. The shape turned and melted back into the circling dark. Gideon released a breath so shallow it barely existed. At 3:47 a.m., Miriam stepped out from behind a spruce. She looked exactly as she had that morning. That last morning. Blue cardigan, jeans, hair twisted into a careless bun. Her face tired, not ghostly, not decayed, just worn down by the argument, the bad sleep, the thousand small disappointments he never fixed. But the way she moved was wrong. Too smooth. She didn't walk so much as glide, as if her feet weren't quite touching the ground. Gideon. Her voice was perfect. The slight hoarseness when she was holding back tears. The exact tone she used when she wanted him to soften first. Ingrid's back went rigid against his. A warning. Miriam drifted closer and details sharpened that shouldn't have been visible in the dark. The tiny scar on her chin from falling off her bike at 7, her uneven eyebrows, the silver bracelet on her wrist, the one he'd given her on their first anniversary, the one she never removed, the one they had to cut away in the hospital. "It's so quiet here," she said. She stopped exactly where Dana had stopped. "I'm so tired of being quiet." His lips parted. Ingrid's hand found his in the darkness and squeezed, once, hard enough to hurt. "Stay silent." Miriam smiled sadly. "You don't have to anymore," she whispered. "You've punished yourself long enough." She took another step. The air around her felt colder. He could smell her shampoo, the cheap lavender kind she always bought. "I know you didn't mean it," she said gently. "I know you loved me." His vision blurred. "I just want you to look at me," she said. "That's all." Gideon stared straight ahead. Didn't blink. Didn't breathe. Behind him, Ingrid's breathing stayed even, anchoring him to the moment, to the circle, to the living. Minutes passed. Miriam's smile faltered. Her expression went empty, then disappointed. Then something else slid into her face, something vast and patient and old. She stepped back. The illusion thinned, unraveling like smoke. Her features stretched, blurred, softened into something unfinished, something that had never been Miriam at all. She turned and drifted away, dissolving into the dark. The circling continued. At 5:58 a.m., the forest released them. Birdsong returned like a lie everyone agreed to believe. The shapes were gone. Dana's dragging footsteps had faded. The lake was still wrong, but it no longer felt hungry. Ingrid stood. "It's over," she said softly. Gideon's legs shook as he rose. His body felt hollowed out, scraped raw but intact. As they packed up in silence, he realized something else. The thing hadn't wanted his death. It wanted his response. And for the first time since Miriam died, Gideon understood the difference between silence and surrender. When they reached the trailhead after sunrise, Ingrid paused. "Open the closet," she told him quietly. "Throw nothing away, but stop pretending time can't move." He nodded. They went their separate ways. Gideon never returned to the lake. But sometimes, late at night, when grief presses close and the apartment feels too quiet, he remembers what the forest taught him. Silence isn't empty. It's crowded. And some things are only waiting for you to say hello. Miriam was crying now. The tears caught what little light remained, sliding down her cheeks exactly the way they had in life. When she cried, she never wanted to be seen doing it. She'd turn her face away, scrub angrily at her eyes, embarrassed by the softness, frustrated with herself for needing comfort at all. She was doing that now. "I don't understand why you won't talk to me," she said, voice cracking in that familiar way. "I came back. I came all this way." Her shoulders trembled. She wiped her face hard, like she was angry at the tears for betraying her. "Say something," she whispered, "please." And that was the cruelty of it. Gideon understood then. This wasn't just his guilt given legs. It was his memory, perfect, exhaustive, merciless, turned into a weapon. Every fragile thing he had loved about her had been sharpened. Her vulnerability, her sadness, the way she needed reassurance but hated asking for it. All of it had been learned, studied, replayed. Because of course, he wanted to comfort her. Of course he wanted to tell her it was okay, that he was sorry, that he would take it all back if he could, that he would give anything to undo that last morning. And whatever was wearing her shape knew that. Gideon bit down on his tongue until copper flooded his mouth. The pain grounded him, anchored him to his body, to the present. He kept his eyes on her, not running, not looking away, but he didn't respond. He didn't speak. He didn't give it what it wanted. He watched. She stayed there. Minutes stretched into something shapeless. An hour passed, maybe more, and Gideon watched her cycle through every emotion Miriam had ever shown him. Sadness folded into anger, anger curdled into pleading, pleading hardened into cold, brittle rage. Rage collapsed into despair so raw it made his chest ache. Then her face began to do things Miriam's face had never done. Muscles pulled too far. Expressions lingered too long. The sadness became exaggerated, cartoonish. The anger sharpened into something alien. The humanity slipped piece by piece, like a poorly fitted mask losing its grip. Whatever was underneath began to show through. Near the end, when he was exhausted beyond fear, beyond hope, she said the thing that almost broke him. "I forgive you." 3 words. Simple, absolute. Everything he had needed and never believed he deserved. The absolution he'd been drowning without since the day she died. And it was being offered by something that wasn't her. Something that had never been her. Something wearing his love like a costume. That was when Gideon finally understood what Ingrid had meant. The rules weren't there to protect them from the forest. They were there to protect the forest from being fed. They had made these things, shaped them, nourished them with guilt and grief and unspoken apologies. Every night spent replaying mistakes. Every morning waking to silence and wishing, just for a moment, to hear a voice again. We made them powerful by making them necessary. And the only way to starve them was to refuse what they offered, no matter how badly we needed it. At 5:12 a.m., whatever was wearing Miriam's face stopped trying. The tears vanished, the expression emptied. She turned away, and as she did, Gideon could finally see it clearly. The movement was wrong, always had been, too smooth, too loose. He'd only missed it because he'd been desperate. The shape walked back into the trees. The others followed. Footsteps faded into the deep forest, dissolving into distance. And in that fading, Gideon heard something that chilled him more than anything else that night. They were laughing. Not cruel laughter, not mocking. Amused. Like this was a game they'd played countless times before. Like they knew eventually he'd be back. Morning arrived the way it always did here, slowly, reluctantly, drained of color. The cold clung to everything. Damp earth, breath, memory. Ingrid was the first to rise. She straightened with a quiet wince as her joints protested, then lifted the small brass bell and rang it once. The sound cut cleanly through the air. The night was over. Speech was allowed again, existence too. "You did well," she said. Gideon tried to answer, but nothing came. His throat burned, scraped raw by hours of swallowed words. Silence had left its mark. Reuter and Petra began dismantling the camp without a word, hands moving from habit rather than thought. Stakes pulled, fabric folded, packs tight. No one looked toward the empty space where Dana's tent had been. By the next trip, Gideon knew someone else would stand there. Another invitation, another grief. They left in single file. In daylight, the forest pretended to be ordinary. Sunlight filtered through branches. Dirt paths revealed themselves. Leaves rotted politely at their feet. It looked like a place you could get lost in by accident. But Gideon knew better now. He knew what waited between trunks, what listened in the pauses, what borrowed voices and patience and pain. As they walked, he watched the others closely. Reuter still moved carefully, conserving strength, but there was something different in him, a looseness, as if he'd set down a burden he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it had weight. Petra walked with her eyes closed now and then, trusting the ground to meet her steps. She wasn't exhausted. She was calm. Whatever she'd faced in the dark, she'd come out lighter. Even Ingrid had changed. She no longer looked like a god. She looked like someone who had performed a rite and seen it through. She hummed quietly to herself, small, formless sounds, content rather than cheerful. And Gideon understood her role at last. Not a leader, a witness, someone who brought the broken to the edge and waited to see who stepped back. The trailhead appeared after 3 hours. The parking lot was unchanged. Their cars waited exactly where they'd left them, along with Dana's gray sedan. Ingrid took the keys from Dana's pack, unlocked it, and drove it to another corner of the lot. A reasonable place, a forgettable place, somewhere it could be discovered later and explained away. A solo hike, an accident, disappearance. These mountains swallowed people all the time. Search teams would come, they would look, they would find nothing. Eventually they would stop. No one commented. That silence was part of the system. Too, the quiet erasure. The ordinary cruelty of making someone vanish without ever admitting they were gone. Before Gideon got into his car, Ingrid pressed a small card into his hand. No plastic coating this time. Just a phone number. "When the quiet starts hurting," she said. He drove back to Anchorage, back to streets and traffic lights and a world that felt thin and unreal. Back to the apartment that still smelled faintly like Miriam's shampoo. He parked outside the building and stayed there. 20 minutes passed. He couldn't make himself go in. Couldn't face the stillness waiting behind the door. Because now he knew. Silence was never empty. It was watching. The room felt hollow when he stepped inside, like a shell abandoned by something that once lived there. The card lay warm against his skin, the number already etched into his mind with the permanence of a vow or a threat. He shut the door. Lavender lingered in the air, softened by dust and time. The apartment hadn't changed. That was the problem. Miriam's mug still waited in the dish rack, angled slightly as if expecting her hand to return. For months it had stayed there untouched, a quiet accusation. This time Gideon reached for it. He washed the mug slowly, watching water bead and slide across the ceramic. He dried it, Then he opened the cabinet and placed it inside, closing the door firmly, deliberately. Somewhere it couldn't see him anymore. The quiet rushed in to fill the space he disturbed. It was vast, crushing, the kind of silence that pressed inward instead of drifting away. He stood there, breathing, feeling how loud his own existence was. And beneath that emptiness, so faint it might have been imagined, there was something else. A rhythm, measured, patient. If he listened closely enough, he could almost sense it. Not sound exactly, but the memory of sound. Motion without movement. The idea of something circling, waiting for the moment he would finally admit how unbearable it was to keep living with ghosts and no language strong enough to banish them. 6 months. He told himself he could endure that long. He had to, because he understood the truth now, and it terrified him more than the forest ever had. Giving up would be easier. Breaking the rule, letting go, stepping into that endless motion where grief dissolved into numbness and guilt lost its teeth. Relief was close, closer than he wanted to admit, waiting just beyond a single cry into the dark. Peace, he knew, was only one scream away. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. Story 2, The Mercy of Thieves. Danny Kozer's fingers closed around the wire cutters, marveling at how deceptively light they felt. Too light, maybe, for the chaos they were about to unleash. His older brother, Eddie, had already slipped through the torn chain-link fence, low to the cracked asphalt where weeds jutted up like jagged teeth. The Hillrest Medical Complex loomed ahead, a hulking silhouette against the bleak November sky. Boarded windows reflected the weak glow of the highway lights, rust streaking the walls in patterns that looked disturbingly like dried blood. Danny had scavenged copper from empty factories and abandoned homes for years, but this was different. This building still thrummed. You didn't need to touch the wiring to feel it. The low, constant hum seeped into your bones, raising goosebumps even through layers of jackets and gloves. Condemned for nearly a decade, forgotten by the city, shrugged off by the historical society, yet electricity still ran through it. Eddie moved like a man possessed, never pausing, never hesitating. Nothing had slowed him since Julie left, since the bank seized the house, since life had chewed him raw and spat him out. All forward motion, no brakes, no thought of consequence. Danny followed, as he always did, the dutiful little brother even at 34, even knowing the risks. Crossing the lot, Danny's mind flickered to his own children. Chloe, 7, with a laugh that lit up a room. Mason, 5, stubborn and bright-eyed, whose birthday party he'd missed last week, too ashamed to show up empty-handed. The overdue child support notice still burned red on his kitchen counter, a daily reminder that the world didn't wait for anyone's excuses. And yet here he was, creeping behind Eddie through the shadows of decay, drawn by necessity, by loyalty, by the merciless gravity of survival. Tonight, theft wasn't a choice. It was mercy, the only way to keep the lights on at home, to keep hunger from climbing the walls of his apartment like the weeds in this parking lot. He paused just outside the main doors, watching Eddie's silhouette slip inside the broken frame. The hum of live wires pulsed through the cracked pavement, vibrating in rhythm with his own heartbeat. Danny swallowed, gripping the cutters like a lifeline. Whatever they were about to take, whatever risk they were courting, there was no turning back. The mercy of thieves was cold, quiet, and urgent, and tonight it was all they had. This wasn't just a break-in. Eddie called it a job, like they were professionals, like they weren't trespassing in a place that had swallowed decades of pain. One night could net 3 months' worth of cash, if they survived, if the floor didn't give way beneath them, if the current didn't fry them. If the forgotten chemical vats and shards of glass hidden in the shadows didn't claim them first. The side door had already been pried open, bent back like a warning. Someone else had been here before. Kids chasing high, homeless seeking shelter from the creeping winter. Danny stepped inside and the air hit him like a punch to the chest. Mold, rotting wood, the sharp tang of pigeon droppings and something else. A chemical ghost that clung to the back of his throat, refusing to leave. Eddie's headlamp flicked on, slicing through darkness so dense it almost seemed to push back. Hallways stretched into nothing. Walls warped into jagged murals by years of water damage. Patterns that almost looked intentional. A wheelchair lay toppled, its single wheel spinning lazily, moved by a draft Danny couldn't feel. He'd seen a lot of abandoned buildings, but this one was alive in a way that made him itch. Not with people, at least not living ones, but with everything they had left behind. Grief, fear, illness, lost hope. The walls soaked it up like sponges. The faint, metallic tang of history clung to Danny's skin. Eddie moved forward, eyes fixed on the ceiling where a thick conduit stretched like a vein through the hospital's bones. Copper, heavy, valuable, hundreds a foot if they were careful. He followed it like a predator tracking prey. Danny's throat tightened as he trailed him deeper into the bowels of the place. They passed through what used to be the emergency room. Glass crunched under their boots. A stretcher sat in the center, its leather straps dangling like dead tentacles. On the wall, someone had scrawled in 3-foot letters, "Abandon all hope." A joke once, maybe. Now just a reminder that the world inside these walls had a weight. The hum of electricity throbbed louder, vibrating through the floor into Danny's bones. Eddie stopped abruptly. Danny almost collided with him. The beam of the headlamp settled on a junction box mounted on the wall. Next to it, a door stood out. Fresh paint, shiny hinges, a keycard reader glowing red like an eye in the darkness. Danny's stomach knotted. His instincts screamed at him to leave, a primal warning curling up from the base of his spine, the same voice that made you snatch your hand away from a hot stove. But Eddie didn't hesitate. He moved toward the door like it owed him something, like the danger didn't matter. Danny's heartbeat roared in his ears as he followed, each step heavy with the knowledge that one wrong move could end everything. The building didn't just remember sorrow, it hungered for it. And tonight, they were walking right into its mouth. Danny's fingers traced the door frame, tracing the edge of fresh weather, stripping, airtight, deliberate. His mind raced. Whoever had put this here hadn't been half-hearted, they'd done real work, unlike the city's lazy boarding job when the hospital was condemned. This was no abandoned shell. Someone had installed a security door, someone was running electricity, someone was controlling the temperature. Warm air seeped through the edges, carrying the faint tang of human presence, privacy, control. A warning that nothing accidental should stumble across what lay beyond. A tiny camera blinked above the frame, catching their headlamps. Red light flashed once, then vanished. Eddie's hand froze. They both froze. Danny counted the beats of his own heart. 10, 20, 30. The keycard reader flickered green. The lock clicked. The door swung open on silent hinges, spilling light into the corridor. Real light. Clean, steady, fluorescent. Not the dying yellow of broken security bulbs, but the kind of illumination you'd find in a place that was alive. Warm air rolled out toward them, carrying the sharp antiseptic sting of a hospital, and impossibly, the rich, inviting smell of freshly brewed coffee. Eddie's eyes met Danny, and Danny saw his own disbelief mirrored back, caught between the instinct to flee and the knowledge they'd already crossed a line from which there was no turning back. Eddie had that familiar gleam in his eyes, the one that said profit before consequence. the same one that had led to the second mortgage, the unpaid loans, the recklessness that didn't factor in the fallout. They stepped inside. The corridor was immaculate, shining tile under flawless fluorescent panels, walls painted a sterile beige with not a scuff in sight. Directional signs pointed to rooms that didn't exist in the official blueprints. Monitors hummed softly like a living heartbeat. Someone was here. Someone was paying bills. Someone with real resources. Danny's mind shifted with every step, struggling to reconcile the impossible. This wasn't a squatter's refuge. This wasn't a hideout cobbled together from scraps. This was a living, breathing operation, hidden in the corpse of a place everyone else had written off. And the deeper they walked, the more the air seemed to thicken, as though the hospital itself was holding its breath, waiting for them to understand just how far they'd stepped into someone else's world. This wasn't a squatter's den, and it wasn't some makeshift lab. Every detail screamed intent, money, and purpose. Whoever had built this had thought it through, invested in it, and had a reason that justified both. The corridor twisted and forked, ignoring the hospital's original blueprint entirely. This was a wing of its own making, rooms stacked, doors aligned, nothing accidental. Danny caught glimpses through the windows. One room glowed with humming servers, blue and red LEDs pulsing like the heart of some silent machine. Another held neatly stacked medical supplies, boxes lined in orderly rows. A kitchen gleamed stainless steel and granite immaculate, as if plucked from a luxury apartment. He stopped, staring at the coffee maker, still on, steam curling lazily into the air. A newspaper lay open, the crossword half filled in blue ink. Next to it, a mug bore a faded message. "World's best dad." Someone had been here that morning. Someone who would return. The hum of machinery surrounded them. Not just wires and electricity, but pumps and monitors. Life support systems quietly circulating fluids through invisible veins. Danny had spent over a decade at a stamping plant. He knew the sound of machines running perfectly, of expensive equipment maintained by hands that cared. Whoever ran this place checked it, tended it, noticed everything. Disturb a wire here, move a box there, and they would know. At the corridor's end, the door stood open. Inside, under the soft glow of medical monitors, lay the old man. Frail, no more than 120 pounds, he reclined at a 45-degree angle, sheets crisp and white, an eerie sense of regality about him. Tubes snaked into both arms. A catheter disappeared beneath the sheets. Electrodes dotted his chest, sending constant signals to the machines that kept him alive. His hair, thinning and combed, framed a face otherwise ravaged by time. And yet his eyes, bright, piercing, unbroken, tracked them with impossible acuity. Everything about him was old, fragile, kept alive by technology, by careful tending, by relentless attention. But those eyes were alive in a way that the body around them was. They searched, analyzed, measured, and in a single glance, Danny understood that this wasn't just a man on a bed. This was someone or something who had been waiting, watching, waiting for them to step inside. Danny's hands were trembling, fingers tingling numb with fear. Every instinct in his body screamed to turn, to flee, to erase the memory of stepping inside this place. But Eddie was already moving forward, drawn by a magnetic force Danny couldn't name, couldn't understand. He circled the bed with the calculated grace of a predator assessing its prey. This wasn't just medicine. It was luxury care, expensive, private, meticulously maintained. Every monitor, every tube, every hum of machinery came at a staggering cost. The room was massive, likely the fusion of 2 hospital rooms. A leather recliner and a wall-mounted television occupied one corner. A kitchenette with a microwave and a small refrigerator hinted at domesticity. Bookshelves stretched along the wall, heavy with untouched hardcovers, some dense medical texts, others airport thriller fiction. Pristine pages, spines unbroken, as if no one had dared touch them. Someone had curated this space with care, stocking it for the old man, yet he hadn't read a single word, or perhaps he couldn't. The old man's lips moved silently. A ventilator tube ran deep into his throat, robbing him of speech. Danny's mind raced with questions. Who was he? Or who had he once been? The room spoke of wealth, but not generational, untouchable riches. This was comfort purchased with devotion. Someone's father, grandfather, someone whose life mattered enough that love had manifested in endless expense and precise attention, keeping him alive against the odds. Eddie's mind had already leapt ahead. Who deserves care like this? Who is important enough that a family would pay through the teeth for comfort, for survival? Thousands spent already. What was a few more to secure their goal? Danny's throat went dry. This is kidnapping, he wanted to whisper. But Eddie had begun inspecting the IV lines, the ventilator, the catheter. Standard equipment, portable, all movable. The machines hummed their steady rhythm, monitors glowing soft blues and greens, casting the room in an eerie calm. Outside, the abandoned hospital stretched in darkness, silent except for the occasional groan of settling concrete. Inside, time seemed to stretch, and Danny realized with a cold twist in his stomach that the night had already chosen their roles. One was prey, one was hunter, and neither would leave unchanged. A metallic clang echoed through the room, distant but jarring. Both brothers froze mid-step, hearts hammering in the sudden silence. Danny could hear everything now, his own ragged breaths, too loud, too raw, Eddie's breaths quick and eager, the old man's mechanical inhales, steady and relentless through the ventilator. And then footsteps, faint, deliberate, retreating. Not coming toward them, but moving away, somewhere deep in the building. Someone else was here. Eddie's eyes locked with Danny, and in that suspended moment they held still, letting the sounds fade, letting the invisible presence slip into the shadows. A door clicked shut somewhere down the hall. The low hum of an engine started in the parking lot outside, distant and muted. Whoever it was, they were leaving. Only the machines remained, beeping with clinical patience. Outside, the abandoned hospital breathed in silence again. Eddie's resolve snapped back. "Grab the wheelchair," he commanded, voice low but sharp. Danny's legs obeyed before his mind could protest. Down the corridor he moved, each step measured but fast, adrenaline cutting through fear. He could turn, could run back through the security door, across the lot into the van, vanish without a trace. But he didn't. Eddie was his brother, the last tether to family, to blood, to the small remnants of loyalty that still mattered. Their parents were gone, their sister unreachable in another state. Just the two of them, bound by mistakes, debt, and a desperation that led them into this stark, forbidden place. The wheelchair waited, 20 yards back, pristine and silent, rolling effortlessly over the polished floor. Danny pushed it toward the room, past the clean walls, under the harsh glow of institutional lights. Eddie was already dismantling the old man's lifelines, precise in practice, as if fear had been abandoned long ago. IVs came first, taped and tucked, then the catheter and electrodes. The man made no sound, couldn't, with the ventilator still threaded through his throat. Eddie's stopped hand hovering over the ventilator. It had to come out. They couldn't move him with that tube in place. The machine barely assisted anyway. Why it was there, Danny couldn't say. But he did notice the old man's eyes, sharp and terrified, yet glimmering with something else, something like hope. A fragile, improbable hope that maybe, against all odds, these two fools were about to pull him from a fate worse than death. And then the old man bucked, straining against the restraints. Danny hadn't realized how tight they were until now, how much of his fear had been mirrored in the old man's silent struggle. The room pulsed with tension, every second stretching into eternity as they prepared to cross the line from desperation to audacity. The straps holding the old man were soft, cloth-bound, gentle but firm enough to keep him from wandering. Not cruel, just confining. Danny stared, bewildered. Why restrain someone already trapped by tubes and wires, a man stripped of speech and agency? Eddie moved with swift precision, tugging the ventilator tube free. The old man gasped, a wet, rattling sound that crawled under Danny's skin, but he inhaled and exhaled over and over, desperate and alive. His lips parted and moved, forming words that would never escape, producing only animal-like sounds, small and broken, but undeniably human. Together, the brothers lifted him, shifting his fragile frame into the wheelchair. He weighed next to nothing, skin stretched thin over brittle bones. Danny's hands trembled as he adjusted the man's feet on the footrests. Up close, Danny noticed the neat surgical scars etched across his arms and chest, precise and deliberate. Not accidents, not illnesses, but a lifetime of calculated interventions. Someone had cared for him obsessively, cutting and repairing, reshaping him over and over. Eddie wheeled him toward the exit, and the old man's head lifted, tracking the room one last time. The monitors still beeped, machines silently recording nothing. The bed sat perfectly made, the books untouched, the kitchen pristine. His lips moved. No sound emerged, but Danny read the silent plea. Please. Whether a plea for freedom or a wish to be left behind, he couldn't know. Through the dim corridors they moved, past the monitoring station now dark, past supply rooms stacked with gauze, gloves, and medicine Danny couldn't name, past the kitchen where a half-completed crossword lay, evidence of someone who would return to find their charge gone. Eddie led the way, pushing the wheelchair, while Danny followed close, the door clicking shut behind them with a finality that made his chest tight. The hospital swallowed them in darkness, cold and oppressive. Eddie's headlamp danced wildly across cracked tile and peeling walls. The wheelchair rattled over debris, the old man's breathing growing faster, shallow, erratic, somewhere between panic and exhilaration. Danny kept his light fixed on the path ahead, yet shadows flickered in the corners of his vision, shapes bending where they shouldn't, doors inching open as if alive. Danny's mind raced. What had they just done? They hadn't just stolen copper or trespassed. They had crossed into a living secret, a space someone had built and protected at great expense. And now, every choice, every movement carried weight they hadn't fully understood, weight that was already pressing down on them with every echoing footstep through the abandoned, humming hospital. They had crossed the threshold into something far darker than any abandoned hospital. The old man in the wheelchair, thin, fragile, tethered to machines, wasn't a random victim. He was trapped, yes, but not by circumstance. He was held in a facility too polished, too meticulous, too well-funded for this to be a simple kidnapping. The care he received spoke of obsession, wealth, and secrecy. This wasn't ransom. This wasn't crime for profit. Eddie muttered under his breath, his voice a low hiss. This is something else, something worse. The exit finally came into view. Sunlight slanted across cracked asphalt, the van waiting, the promise of escape. 10 feet from freedom, the sharp jangle of Eddie's phone tore through the night. A ringtone pop and annoyingly cheerful cut through their tension. Eddie fumbled, nearly tipping the wheelchair. The old man let out a sound, a strange mix of moan and chuckle, as though he already understood what was coming. Danny's gut nodded. Don't answer it, he wanted to shout, but the words stuck. They both knew it didn't matter. Whoever called already knew, already knew. Eddie lifted the phone to his ear, hand trembling. 5 seconds passed. 10. His face drained of color, pale and brittle like newspaper left out in the sun. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled the phone away, but didn't hang up as though it had bitten him. "They want him back," Eddie whispered. "They said, bring Floyd Tennyson back now and we walk away." Danny froze, ice poured through his veins. Floyd Tennyson looked back at them, and something in his expression made Danny's stomach turn. Terror had vanished. In its place, a cold, unsettling satisfaction. Floyd had expected this all along. He had known. They had never had a chance. "There must be cameras," Danny said, voice taut. "They saw everything, every room, every corridor." Eddie's phone buzzed again. A woman's voice, calm, methodical, filled the earpiece. "We're pulling up the data. 30 seconds. That's all it takes." Keys clicked rapidly in the background, a machine of precision behind the call. 30 seconds. Enough time to obliterate lives. Danny's mind snapped to his children, Chloe and Mason, his plans for them, the promises he had already failed to keep. Everything he hoped for was gone, thrown away in a moment of desperation and recklessness. Another buzz. A message appeared. A photograph, a newspaper clipping, crisp and damning. The headline: "Execution Technician Retires After 30 Years." Beneath it, a younger man standing rigid beside a stark, clinical table outfitted with restraint straps. Floyd Tennyson. The man they had thought vulnerable, helpless, and frail had been someone who orchestrated life and death with unflinching hands, a career spent at the edge of morality. Danny swallowed, choking back panic. The room, the corridors, the machines, they weren't just a prison. They were a stage, and he and Eddie had wandered straight into the spotlight. And Floyd had been waiting, always waiting. Danny felt his stomach cave. An executioner. They'd kidnapped a man who had ended lives for a living, and now he was theirs. The phone vibrated again and again. Images scrolled across the screen, no time to process. Danny caught flashes before Eddie snatched it away. A woman frozen mid-scream, a bloated body twisted unnaturally, a child's tiny hand poking from beneath a blanket. The corpses seen, incomplete, as if death itself had been sloppy, careless. Eddie muttered under his breath, barely audible. Botched. He botched them all. Floyd Tennyson, the old man in the wheelchair, shook with silent laughter. No voice, no sound, just a wheezing rattle, but it was unmistakable. His shoulders trembled, eyes glistening with tears as if mocking them, mocking their fear, mocking the greed that led them here. Eddie shoved the phone into his pocket and gripped the wheelchair handles. "We're done here. Let the law handle him. He's a killer. Look at what he's done." Danny wanted to believe it. He wanted to tell himself they could wash their hands of this. But the truth hit harder than the November wind outside. They weren't just witnesses. They were now criminals too. They stolen a man from a place that wasn't theirs, broken the law in ways that would haunt them for years. Floyd could go back, free and untouched, and they'd rot in a cell explaining why stealing an executioner seemed like a good idea to pay rent. The hospital doors swung open, and cold air slammed Danny in the face, sharp and clean after the stagnant rot they'd left behind. The van sat across the cracked asphalt, 30 yards away, waiting. Eddie was already pushing forward when the glare hit. Headlights ignited from 3 vehicles, cutting the night like searchlights. Engines hummed, doors opened, footsteps rang sharp against the pavement. Danny raised a hand, shielding his eyes. "Please," Eddie shouted into the glare, voice cracking. "We didn't." A woman's voice sliced through the night. "Bring him here." They tried to protest. Floyd had been removed from his machines, stripped of his lifelines, but she wouldn't listen. Every movement was deliberate, calculated, as if she'd anticipated this from the start. She stepped into the light. Middle-aged, gray hair tied back, bulky coat making her silhouette imposing yet familiar. Her face was unsettlingly ordinary, warm, approachable, the kind you trusted with your kids. Yet there was an authority in her eyes that froze Danny's blood. One by one, more figures emerged from the darkness. A man young, late 20s or early 30s. Another, then three more, forming a semicircle that trapped them. No way forward, no escape. Danny's heart thumped in his chest. This wasn't just a confrontation. This was a reckoning. The night, the hospital, the stolen man. They had walked straight into the eyes of someone who had been waiting all along. And now, there was nowhere to run. No one stood between them and the van in anger. That was the worst part. Every face in the headlights was calm, intent, efficient. These were not people reacting, they were people executing a routine. The woman approached the wheelchair and studied Floyd the way someone inspects a mess they didn't expect to clean tonight. No rage, no disgust, just mild irritation. "Did they hurt you?" she asked gently. Floyd's lips twitched, a thin, eager sound slipped out. "No." She rested a hand on his shoulder. The motion was smooth, rehearsed, almost affectionate, like muscle memory. "We got nervous when the alarms triggered. Thought maybe you'd finally found the call switch." Floyd's eyes lost their spark. Whatever triumph he'd tasted moments ago evaporated. He understood the order of things. He always had. The woman straightened and spoke as if finishing a report they already knew by heart. Their names, their ages, their failures. Eddie, divorce, maxed cards, unpaid balances. Danny, old charges, late support, nights spent crawling through condemned buildings looking for anything worth selling. Their driver's license photos had surfaced in under 2 minutes. After that, digging deeper was effortless. Something inside Danny collapsed. They knew about his children, their school district, their mother's address, every weak point laid bare. They'd been monitoring this place for 8 months, waiting. They expected intruders, people desperate enough to wander inside. What they hadn't expected was someone foolish enough to take him. Eddie tried one last time. His voice broke. "Please, we didn't see anything, just let us go." The younger man stepped forward. Up close, Danny noticed the tears. They dried into tracks like he'd been crying so long it no longer registered. "You saw everything," the man said quietly. "The machines, the work." The woman knelt beside Floyd, lowering herself until they were eye to eye. Her joints cracked when she moved. She was older than Danny had first thought, old enough to have buried someone, old enough to still be paying for it. "They thought you were being saved," she said softly, "that you mattered." Then she looked at Floyd. "Tell them." Floyd's ruined throat worked, and this time a voice emerged, thin, broken, but unmistakably clear as it carried through the cold night. "Mercy," he whispered. "They're keeping me breathing so I can suffer." The words slipped out of Floyd like a confession he'd rehearsed 1,000 times. The woman smiled, not with cruelty, but with something disturbingly serene. She rose to her feet, dusting off her knees. A simple gold ring caught the light on her finger. Ordinary, domestic, someone's wife, someone's mother. "He spent 3 decades delivering death," she said calmly. "A routine, 3 chemicals, one to knock you out, one to take your breath, one to stop the heart." Her voice never wavered. The problem was him. She explained how veins were missed, how old compounds were used, how needles slipped into muscle instead of blood. When that happened, the first drug failed. The body went rigid, silent, but the mind stayed awake. Then came the rest. The burning. The man who'd been crying spoke again, his voice splitting. My brother lasted 11 minutes. 11 minutes. They kept pushing more, convinced he was already gone. But the monitors said otherwise. His heart screamed the truth while his body couldn't. 11 minutes of being cooked alive from the inside, fully aware, unable to move. Danny's imagination turned traitor. He saw it, felt it, seconds stretching into lifetimes, 660 moments of pure terror. 42 times, the woman continued. That's how often he failed, and every night he went home and slept peacefully, told himself it was just work. Floyd shook his head, weak and desperate. She cut him off. Trying isn't enough. So they took over. 8 months of precision, calibrating torment. Pain refined to an art, unbearable but never fatal, keeping him balanced on the edge, alive, a living lesson. Danny couldn't hold it in. He doubled over, retching onto the pavement, bile splattering between his shoes. His body rejected the truth before his mind could. Eddie stood motionless. The unstoppable force finally met something it couldn't muscle past. He begged, promised silence, promised disappearance. It didn't matter. They unplugged Floyd earlier. For the first time in months, he wasn't screaming inside his own body. Fresh air filled his lungs. He sat upright, human again. A mercy break. You interfered, the woman said evenly. You disrupted our work. You made us visible. That carried a price. The others stepped forward. Danny's voice cracked. Wait, please, what do you want? She paused, head tilted, as if genuinely considering. What do we want? She said softly. We want balance. Floyd back, he stays alive. We continue the treatment. Every scream counts. Every second matters. Justice for the families who died trapped inside themselves. Eddie's words stumbled out, panicked. We'll help. We'll bring him back inside. We'll. The woman laughed, a sound colder than a scream, sharper than anything Danny had ever heard. It wasn't fear. It was certainty. The kind of laugh that had already mapped every possible outcome and found them all equally useless. Floyd's treatment, she said, calm as ice, is an art, precision, controlled suffering. Every heartbeat, every breath measured, pain exact, never more, never less. And you've just thrown it all off, machines off, drip stopped. Everything must be reset. They moved closer now. Danny could smell them, sweat, coffee, a faint metallic tang that made his stomach twist. One carried zip ties, another a roll of duct tape. Their movements were practiced, deliberate, experienced. Technically, we could let you walk, she mused, voice smooth. Trust you to stay quiet, but Floyd lives on borrowed time. The state thinks he died 2 years ago. Mark, she gestured at a man with silent eyes, was there. Morgue work switched the tags, cremated someone else. Floyd never existed officially. If anyone finds out he's here, 42 families lose their chance at justice. Danny's knees went weak. I swear, he gasped. I swear we won't tell. Mark moved first. Silent, controlled, grief and determination etched into his features. He grabbed Eddie's arm. Eddie struggled, but the man's fist slammed into his solar plexus like a piston. Air exploded out of Eddie in a single, desperate gasp. He crumpled, winded, curling into himself on the asphalt. Danny froze. For the first time, he saw his brother stripped of bravado, middle-aged, worn, soft, a man who had survived on desperation and bad choices, not skill. Danny ran 6 steps. That's all it took before someone slammed into him from behind. Asphalt scraped his cheek. Pain flared. Hands yanked his arms back, cold plastic biting as zip ties cinched tight, cutting off blood. He was rolled over, and there she was, the woman towering over him, lit by the highway's distant glare. Calm, composed, unstoppable. She spoke as if narrating a story, not issuing a threat. "They'll take all three of you back inside," she said, voice like a blade. "Hook Floyd to his machines again. Then we'll decide what to do with you." Danny's chest tightened. Every instinct screamed. Every second stretched like eternity. And somewhere deep in him, he knew the real nightmare had only just begun. Danny tried to speak, tried to say his children's names. The words barely made it past his lips before the woman answered him, calm and unyielding. If his kids mattered that much, she said, he should have remembered them before cutting into a condemned building for scrap. There was no anger in her tone, just certainty, like gravity explaining itself. They hauled the brothers across the lot. Eddie dragged uselessly, gasping, shoes scraping the asphalt. Behind them, Floyd's wheelchair rattled forward, pushed by Mark, who hadn't stopped crying once. His tears fell silently, endlessly, like something inside him had broken long ago and never repaired itself. The hospital swallowed them. Lights snapped on one by one, harsh beams slicing through the dark. The door shut behind them with a sound that felt permanent. Danny tried to count turns, doorways, intersections, anything to map a way out, but his thoughts refused to line up. Panic scattered them. The camera above the secured corridor tracked their movement, its lens adjusting with a faint mechanical twitch. The indicator glowed. Access granted. The clean hallway closed around them. Bright lights, sterile walls, that sharp medicinal smell, fighting unsuccessfully to bury something deeper, something alive, something wrong. They rolled Floyd back into the room where the machine still hummed, patient and waiting. The monitors chirped to life as if relieved to have purpose again. The men lifted Floyd with effortless coordination. Smooth, practiced. Danny understood then that this ritual had happened many times before. New lines slid into place. Electrodes pressed to skin. When someone reached for the breathing tube, the woman stopped them with a small shake of her head. "Not yet," she said. "Let him breathe, let him remember." Danny and Eddie were forced into chairs at the foot of the bed, wrists biting against plastic restraints. Front row seats, no escape, no mercy. The woman spoke gently now, almost conversational. Pain, she explained, wasn't universal. Some people broke easily. Others endured far more than expected. Floyd, unfortunately, had proven resilient. Months of observation had taught them that. So we adapted. She turned a dial. Floyd's body seized instantly. Every muscle locked at once, spine bowing violently, jaw clamping down so hard blood spilled from his mouth. No scream escaped him, but his entire body became one. The machine screamed instead, alarms shrill and frantic. She counted aloud, slow, precise. 10 seconds stretched into eternity. Then she turned the dial back. Floyd collapsed into the bed, twitching, gasping. Saliva and blood stained his chin. His eyes rolled, unfocused, swimming somewhere far away. "Targeted nerve stimulation," she explained calmly. "Exact, adjustable. We can choose where he hurts, how badly, how long." Danny's stomach twisted. Eddie sobbed quietly beside him, and Floyd lay there breathing, alive, kept exactly where they wanted him. Like he's on fire, or locked in ice, or being ripped apart from the inside, all without a single bruise to prove it ever happened. Eddie had stopped trying to hide it. He was crying openly now, chest hitching, breath broken. Danny couldn't look at his brother. He couldn't look anywhere except Floyd. The old man's eyes were gone again, rolled so far back only the whites showed. His body twitched in small, helpless jerks. Nearly a full minute passed before his gaze drifted back into place, before awareness crawled back behind his pupils. When it did, there was nothing in it but exhaustion. The woman clasped her hands lightly, businesslike. "So," she said, "about the two of you." She laid it out calmly, paths on a map. They could release them and trust their word. They could make sure they never spoke again. Or she let the third option hang unfinished. In the quiet, Danny heard everything too clearly. Floyd's ruined breathing, Eddie's muffled sobs, his own heart slamming against his ribs like it was trying to escape. Mark wiped his face and muttered that they should just kill them. The woman shook her head, already decided. Two grown men vanish inside a condemned building and people come looking. Police, fire crews, curious idiots with cameras. Attention was dangerous. Attention ruined careful work. So what then? Someone asked. She studied Danny and Eddie the way a mechanic studies an engine, assessing use, where potential, running numbers only she could see. "They work for us." Eddie made a sound that didn't quite form into a word. Floyd required constant attention, she explained. Monitoring, adjustments, medication. Someone always needed to be here. Up until now, they'd taken turns driving hours, abandoning jobs and families to keep the schedule intact. It was wearing them down. She pulled a chair close and sat, relaxed, as if this were a kitchen table conversation. "But you too," she continued, "need money, badly. You're already comfortable crossing lines, and now you understand who Floyd is, what he did, why this matters." Danny's head spun. "You want us to hurt him." She corrected him gently. "You'd operate equipment, follow instructions, push buttons. It's no different than running a machine on a factory floor. Safer than stealing scrap, steady pay, cash, $200 a shift. A few nights a week. More money than Danny had earned in years." "You're out of your mind," he said, though his voice lacked the strength he wanted it to have. The woman leaned forward, elbows on her knees, eyes kind, almost sympathetic. She spoke like someone explaining a hard truth. "Floyd caused 42 people to die screaming inside bodies that couldn't move. Families watched from behind glass. No one punished him. The system protected him. So we corrected the imbalance." She glanced back at the bed, where Floyd lay breathing alive. "This is accountability," she said softly. Crawl up his spine at that. Cold, deliberate understanding. Floyd swallowed, the effort visible, painful. "That's the trick," he rasped. "They don't chain you here. They let you walk in on your own." Danny stared at the old man, searching for lies, for manipulation. But there was no calculation left in Floyd's face. Just ruin, just time. "They'll tell you it's justice," Floyd continued. "And maybe it is for a while. But after enough nights, the word stops meaning anything. It just becomes routine." Eddie shook his head slowly, like a man waking from anesthesia. "Why are you telling us this?" Floyd's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Because this," he said, breath rattling, "is the only mercy I have left to give." Silence settled again, heavy, suffocating. Hours later, footsteps returned. Food appeared, water. The zip ties were cut, but the door stayed locked. No threats, no pressure, just waiting. Morning came as a pale imitation of light through a high, dust-choked window. The woman returned alone. "So," she said, calm as ever, "have you decided?" Danny looked at Eddie. For the first time all night, his brother met his eyes. Something passed between them, years of shared childhood, borrowed tools, borrowed money, borrowed hope. Men who had already crossed too many lines because survival demanded it. Eddie nodded once. They said yes. The woman smiled, satisfied, not triumphant. She handed them a schedule, explained procedures, safety checks, rules. No improvisation, no excess. Precision mattered. Then she unlocked the door. Go home, she said. We'll see you tonight. They walked out into the daylight, squinting like prisoners released too early. The parking lot looked smaller in the sun, less haunted, just cracked asphalt and weeds. Danny drove. Neither of them spoke. That night they came back. Danny told himself it was temporary, just long enough to pay off debts, just long enough to catch his breath. He never touched the main controls at first, just watched, logged vitals, confirmed readings. Eddie lasted longer than Danny expected. Then one night, he adjusted a dial. Just a little. Floyd didn't scream. He never could. His body told the story instead. After that, it got easier. Routine took over. Shifts blurred together. Cash appeared in envelopes. Danny bought Chloe the bike he'd promised. He paid child support in full early. His ex-wife looked at him differently. Better. Months passed. One night, Danny arrived early and found Floyd alone, eyes open, waiting. You still think you're different, Floyd whispered. Danny didn't answer. He turned the dial. Years later, when the complex finally burned, electrical fault, they said, investigators found nothing usable. No records, no bodies, just ash and melted steel. Danny went back to scrap work. Eddie moved out of state. They never spoke about Hillrest again. But sometimes, late at night, Danny wakes to the sound of a steady beeping that isn't there. And in the dark, he remembers what Floyd said. That mercy doesn't come from innocence. It comes from knowing exactly what you've become and choosing just once not to pass it on. Life, our jobs, our debts, Eddie swallowed, they already own us. Danny knew he was right. Running was something you did before people learned your children's names. He leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes. For a moment, he tried to remember a time when choices were simple, when right and wrong felt like solid ground instead of shifting sand. That time felt like it belonged to someone else now. Floyd spoke again without opening his eyes. They don't need chains, he said. Fear works better. Guilt works best. Eddie laughed once, short and broken. You sound like you've rehearsed this. I've had months, Floyd said. Months to think. Pain gives you a lot of time to think. The light outside grew stronger. Colors slowly returned to the world. Somewhere, birds started making noise like nothing was wrong. Like this wasn't a place where people had turned suffering into a system. Danny stood up. His legs felt weak, but they held him. So what do we do? He asked. Floyd opened his eyes and looked straight at him. For the first time, there was something firm there. Not fear, not cruelty, acceptance. You decide who you are, Floyd said. That's the part they can't control. They can make you do things, they can pay you, they can threaten you, but they can't stop you from knowing. Knowing what? Eddie asked. That every time you turn those dials, Floyd said quietly, you'll be choosing, and that choice will follow you longer than the money ever will. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. The woman returned right on time. She took in the scene, the empty zip ties on the floor, the untouched sandwiches, the way Danny and Eddie stood instead of sitting. Her expression didn't change, but something sharpened behind her eyes. Morning, she said. I hope you rested. Danny nodded. We made our decision. She waited, She was very good at waiting. "We'll do it," Danny said. Eddie flinched but didn't argue. "We'll take the shifts. We'll follow your rules." The woman smiled, satisfied. "Good," she said. "That's the sensible choice." As she turned to leave, Floyd spoke one last time. "They won't stop," he said. "Not with me, not with you. This place doesn't let people go clean." The woman paused at the door. For just a second her calm cracked. Not enough to be called anger, not enough to be called regret. "Justice is never clean," she said. Then she closed the door. The machines hummed on. Danny took his place by the controls. His hands were steady. That scared him more than anything else. Somewhere far away, his kids were waking up for school, eating cereal, arguing over nothing important. And in a condemned hospital that wasn't supposed to exist, Danny learned the truth no one ever tells you. Hell isn't a place you fall into. It's a job you accept one quiet morning, telling yourself you'll only do it for a little while. And then realizing, much too late, that a little while is all it takes. Did a terrible thing every day and learned how to live with it. Danny felt that truth settle into his bones as the woman talked numbers and schedules. This was how it happened, not with screaming choices or grand declarations. Just quiet agreements made in clean rooms under humming lights. The first shift started that night. Mark showed them the basics, which screens mattered, which alarms were real and which were just noise, how to log the readings in a notebook that would never leave the building, how to stand so you could watch Floyd's face without having to really see it. "Don't think of him as a person," Mark said, eyes fixed on the monitors. "That's how you survive." Danny nodded, though something inside him recoiled. He thought of Chloe learning to read, sounding out words one letter at a time. Thought of Mason holding his hand crossing the street. He wondered how long it took before a man stopped thinking of other people as people. The hour came. Danny's hand hovered over the dial. His fingers trembled just a little. He remembered the fence, the cutters, the stupid confidence, the belief that the worst thing that could happen was getting caught. He turned the dial. Floyd's body locked instantly. The silent scream again, the arching back, the blood at the mouth. The machines held their objections. Danny counted. 1, 2, 3. Each number landed like a hammer. At 7, Eddie whispered, "Danny." At 9, Danny thought of Cedar Point, the roller coasters, Chloe laughing, Mason pretending not to be scared. 10. He turned it back. Floyd collapsed into himself, gasping, eyes glassy. Alive, still alive. Danny stepped away from the machine and realized his hands were steady now. That scared him more than anything else had. The shifts blended together after that. Night after night, coffee, counting, turning dials, getting paid in thick envelopes of cash that felt heavier than they should have. Eddie talked less. Mark cried less. The woman checked in, efficient, satisfied. Outside, life went on. Bills got paid, birthdays happened, promises were kept. Inside, something else grew. Weeks passed, then months. One night, the woman didn't come. Another night after that, neither did Mark. Just Danny and Eddie alone in the room with Floyd and the machines. Trust. Danny felt it then. The opening Floyd had promised. The quiet moment where the world wasn't watching. Eddie looked at him, eyes hollow. Is this it? Danny walked to the machine that fed the power. The one Floyd had nodded towards so many times without ever saying a word. His hand rested on the switch. He thought of justice, thought of mercy, thought of the line between them and how thin it really was. Floyd opened his eyes. Not pleading, not afraid, just waiting. Danny shut everything down. The hum died, the lights flickered, the machines went silent. For the first time since Danny had known him, Floyd Tennyson breathed freely, and then he didn't. They left before dawn. No alarms, no pursuit. The hospital swallowed the truth like it swallowed everything else. Months later, sometimes late at night, Danny would wake up thinking he heard fluorescent lights humming. Eddie moved out of state. They never talked about it, never needed to. Danny took Chloe and Mason to Cedar Point that summer. Chloe rode every coaster. Mason held his hand, shaking but brave. Danny watched them laugh and felt something like peace, fragile, imperfect, earned at a cost he would carry forever. Some debts aren't paid with money. Some mercy looks a lot like sin. And some places don't haunt you because of what happened there, but because of what you chose to do when no one was watching. Pain became routine. Not the screaming kind. There was hardly any sound, but the kind that settled into muscle memory. The kind that stopped shocking you after a while. Danny could feel himself slipping into it even as the woman kept talking, her voice smooth and instructional, like a supervisor onboarding new hires. This was the danger, not fear, not horror, familiarity. The monitors resumed their calm, indifferent chirping. Lights buzzed overhead. Outside the narrow window, the fog had burned away completely, exposing the hospital in full daylight. Cracked concrete, peeling paint, a dead place pretending to function, a mausoleum powered by extension cords and hatred. A tomb with a pulse. Danny looked at Floyd again, their eyes locked. Something passed between them, not sympathy, not forgiveness, but understanding, clear and sharp, the kind you can't unlearn. They were mirrors. The man who once strapped strangers to a table and told himself it was lawful. The people who kept him alive and told themselves it was justice. The brothers who broke in for scrap metal and told themselves it was survival. Different story, same excuse. I had my reasons. Danny imagined the future unfolding quietly. Chloe older, Mason taller, questions asked over dinner tables years from now. So what did you do for work back then, Dad? He already knew the answer he'd give. Night work, security, monitoring systems, nothing dramatic, just watching screens, making sure things didn't go wrong. They nod, accept it, because children want their parents to be decent, because lies are easier when everyone agrees not to look too closely. Just like Floyd's family probably had, just paperwork, just a job. Eddie's hand slipped into his. Cold, damp, human. Danny squeezed back, grounding himself in that single, fragile connection. Two brothers sitting in a room designed to erase people, waiting to be taught how to erase themselves slowly. Outside, traffic rolled along the highway. Morning commuters, school drop-offs, lives built on schedules and coffee and small complaints. The sound drifted in faintly, steady and rhythmic. Like a heartbeat. Like the monitors. Like electricity, humming through places meant to be dead. The woman stepped closer and held out a clipboard. Danny took it. Names filled the page. Normal names. People who shopped for groceries and paid mortgages and hugged their kids goodnight. People who showed up here a few nights a week to keep an old man balanced between life and agony. Carla, Stephen, Susan, Mark, Jennifer, and at the bottom, already written in tidy blue ink. Daniel Kozer. Tonight 11:00 p.m. to 7:00 a.m. 8 hours, $160. $20 an hour to hollow himself out. His fingers trembled as he held the board. "You'll start tonight," the woman said pleasantly. "Mark will train you. It's straightforward. Most people are nervous at first." She smiled. "Then it becomes manageable." That was the moment Danny understood the true cost. Not the money, not the fear, not even the suffering. The fact that part of him believed her. Because the machines kept humming. The lights kept buzzing. The world kept moving. And two brothers who came to steal copper wire sat quietly, waiting to learn how to hurt a man carefully, efficiently, and with a clear conscience. The worst part wasn't that Danny agreed. The worst part was knowing that, someday soon, it would feel like just another shift.